I'd love to know what drew you to your current career path. Give us a journey from your career from when you started until now.
Totally. So when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to be in communications. Shameless plug for Warner Media and one of its brands, but I used to see my sister watching the show Sex and the City, and one of the characters on there, Samantha Jones, had a public relations firm. So as I would see my sister watching it, I would say, "Oh, what does she do? This looks really cool. She's always going to things. She's always working with people." And so I looked it up and I was like, I can totally do this. So as I started at Spelman, I knew I wanted to do something in communications and I really wanted to focus on strengthening my writing skills. So I decided to become an English major. From there, after graduating, again, I already knew what I wanted to do. So I looked for jobs in that field. And I really, really lucked out to be at CNN working in our internal communications department.
I love that. Shout out to Spelman, fellow Spellhouse fam, and English major. I was an English major, journalism minor at Morehouse. So I
I
love,
love it.
always loving my art for English. So can you give me more information about, what were some of your roles and responsibilities at CNN? I know you're at Warner Media now, but could you talk about CNN specifically in those early days?
Totally. So to be clear, I definitely still work with CNN a lot. We just also, our role has kind of expanded to news and sports in some areas for Warner Media. But on the CNN side, I manage our internal communications and corporate communications. So that's anything from, as our company goes through changes, what that looks like working with our stakeholders, whether that's executives or department heads, for how we communicate that and manage that for employees, making sure that they're completely in the loop and it's as transparent as possible, right? The other piece of it is brand engagement strategy, which I really love. So that manifests in a lot of different ways as we have new content coming out. So if it's screenings or if we're launching a brand or if we're launching a new initiative, even I curate experiences around that. So that's shown up in a variety of ways. For instance, one of the things I'm really proud of, we did a really wonderful screen on the green in several major cities for employees and their families for RBG about the late Justice Supreme Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So it was wonderful to do that, have like the screen on the green element in the different major cities. We also partnered with one of our affinity groups that is for women. So it was just wonderful to kind of find those intentional tie-ins, which is what I especially love to do, that further diversity, of course.
I love that. I love that. Just want to pause here. On your side, do you see yourself pinned to the camera?
I do not, but I've been looking
Okay,
at
great.
the camera the whole time, so I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Oh, and you're pinned
But
on
if
my
you
side.
don't mind me like averting my eyes, I can check.
Oh no, you're great. I just wanted to make sure that you had someone else you're speaking to versus anything, but you're pinned on my side.
Oh, yeah, I always just pretend that whoever I'm talking to is my camera lens.
Awesome, perfect. That sounds great. All right. So to hop back into it, what's the largest challenge you've overcome within your career journey thus far?
I think the largest challenge so far has really just been honestly being confident in the abilities I have and comfortably occupying the space that I've already worked for. I am now a little over 5 years into my career. I graduated from Spelman in 2015. I've seen two elections here. I've seen a lot of change, obviously, from the acquisition of formerly Time Warner to now being Warner Media, the infancy of that brand. I've experienced a lot. And because I work in internal communications, I have close proximity to a lot of our leaders and what that looks like. But that also means that I'm in a lot of situations where I am managing matrix teams. I'm managing up people who are at higher levels than me and working with them, being a project manager, driving timelines, making sure that I am, effectively communicating and managing expectations. So a lot of that can be really hard and difficult, especially when imposter syndrome creeps in, and especially when you're like, I'm the youngest one in the room. But again, I've just realized that I have to stand in what I know and that I'm, obviously occupying the space because I've worked for it. And that's one of the biggest things for me that I've had to challenge. So whether that means giving tough feedback to someone, whether it's someone who is a direct report, an intern of mine, or even someone who's a leader that I really feel like they need to hear this or my perspective, I owe it to myself to do it. And I owe it to the other people I'm working to bring my full self into that space. So that's been the hardest challenge for me. Definitely more of a personal mindset thing. But that's really what I've struggled with a lot. But I think I'm starting to really overcome it, which is great.
I love it. Aimee dropping gems already so early.
I have
What's your
many more for you. Don't worry.
Oh, perfect, perfect. So let's get into I want to talk about your most proud achievement within your career. We talked about the challenges. What are you most proud of so far?
Yeah. There are a couple things, if you indulge me. So, I do a lot of work with our diversity, equity, and inclusion teams at Warner Media, and then specifically our team dedicated to our news and sports division. So, I'm always super proud of that. One of the things that just really makes my heart smile. About 2 years ago now, we launched an internal conversation series called Connected Conversations. So one part of the premise was making sure that we could, create spaces to really build community. And especially on the journalism side, it's important that we're continuing to talk to each other, continuing to push each other, and expose ourselves to different perspectives because that only makes the stories that we're telling and our journalism stronger. And same thing, I would say from various aspects of sports and even for our other studios group. So being able, sorry, to bring that to life and bring people together to have conversations about xenophobia in the midst of COVID and the pandemic and how that is affecting Asian Americans, but Asians everywhere, right? Pacific Islanders everywhere. Having those conversations are really important for us. Having conversations about women's voices and the she session and how that has affected women disproportionately. Those are things that I'm really proud of. One thing 2 years ago that I was really excited about was we were able to bring together, and I curated a panel with Van Jones, one of our talent, Michael B. Jordan, Brian Stevenson, who is the amazing, amazing lawyer and also the author of Just Mercy, and Nija Kirkendall and Scott Budnick, bringing them together in Miami to have a conversation about Just Mercy, the themes within that book. How do we move forward as a community? And most importantly, someone like Nija being able to bring these stories into Hollywood, into life. People like Van using his influence and the things he does at CNN to bring those stories to the forefront. So it was just a wonderful conversation to be able to bring that together. And then more recently, I will say I launched a series internally called The First Time I Realized, and then dot, dot, dot. So we were going to plan to build on it, but I launched it during Black History Month. The first time I realized I was Black. And it was a series that we did where we picked different employees and we had them talk about their experience. It was very raw. I tried to be very intentional from how it was produced to edit to then how it was rolled out, every aspect of the way, keeping DEI in the midst and what that looked like and the strategy. And so we asked them to talk about the first time they realized they were Black, right? Some of those experiences were, my family really embraced that and I was always proud to be Black. And some people talked about the harrowing, experience that a lot of Black Americans have and what that looks like, and typically at a younger age. But then juxtaposed with what I love about being Black, the first time I embraced my Blackness. And so that was something that really fostered empathy and understanding for people who otherwise wouldn't get it. But also, I wanted to be intentional about not triggering Black employees by showing these experiences in hope to spark empathy in people who are not Black. So, things like that are what I'm trying to do. I was really happy to executive produce that series and hopefully do more content like that.
I love that. I love that, especially the work that's being done there. You talked about your work being connected to diverse and equitable spaces. In your opinion, what are some of the most common challenges that the media, sport, let's say media industry first, and then maybe extending that to sports, technology industries have when reaching or communicating to multicultural or diverse audiences?
Yeah, so I can only speak on my perspectives here, but I think what I have acknowledged, and as an avid kind of consumer of especially my industry and others that I'm interested in, like fashion and technology, I think we obviously saw a reckoning last year in June with the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, right? But I think from there, we saw a lot of companies coming into the space with these announcements, putting a stake in the ground, right? And so I think it has to be more than reactive. It has to be proactive, right? And then I think the undercurrent is these other communities, these marginalized communities, right? These people of color who are occupying space in the United States or even outside, right? Because we're everywhere and the world is diverse now. We have to understand that there is a business imperative. In my view, there's a business imperative that once we, are more accepting of that, once we widen our perspectives in that way, it only makes X stronger. It only makes our product stronger. It only makes our marketing outreach stronger. It only makes our, where we're targeting to buy or sell ads, whatever that is for your industry, stronger. There's a business imperative there that when we do this, it it ultimately makes us money. It ultimately affects our bottom line in only a positive way. So there's no reason to not be all in on it. And I think as more companies and leaders start to realize that, it will continue to change.
I love that. In talking about leaders realizing the business imperative or just the moral imperative as well, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what advice would you give to media executives who may be having a hard time understanding the impact of diversity or multicultural creativity or audience?
Yeah, I think it's less of advice and more of a challenge and a charge to take the time to learn. You have to immerse yourself in it. And the same way that, unfortunately, for a lot of Black Americans, we have had to seek out our own literature, our own representation. That's not just there for us. So I don't think there's a world where I have to do that for you. I think a big part of equity also includes making sure that the people who are marginalized and the people who are fighting for that representation and that inclusion, it's not beholden on them to do it. That's another part of equity that we really have to be mindful of. And everyone has to have that mindset in order for that to really change. So I would say, one, be willing to learn. Being a learner is one of the best things you could do. You should constantly be a learner in your life, in my opinion. And I think, two, making sure that by doing that, you are not putting the responsibility of progress on the people who are fighting for it because they need it.
Absolutely. As a Black executive at the intersection of tech, marketing, and sports, what advice would you give diverse individuals who are coming into the industry with hopes of becoming, a manager, executive one day?
Totally. I'm definitely still pretty early in my career, but again, I've experienced a lot, and thankfully, I've had the trajectory that I've had, which I'm grateful for. But I would say, one of the things that, and we definitely experienced this being at Spellhouse, and I think HBCUs in general, there is a standard of excellence that you just must operate at. I encourage everyone to find what that is for you and keep it. But at the same time, I would say, and I literally keep this on my phone, so I'm going to read it to you because it is the background on my phone. And it's so important. It says, progress and perfection can't share the same seat. You have to be willing to understand that in order to move forward, in order to try, I may not, have a perfect outcome every time, but that doesn't mean it's a fail either. It's a lesson. It's progress for me moving forward. And I think the other piece is, I always think about this like, I want to be great. I feel like at Spellhouse, you're always hearing, like, yeah, we're going to be great when we walk out these gates, all these things, right? And it says, greatness is a combination of consistency and love for the work you do. If you are doing it for prestige, if you are creating strictly for validation and inclusion, you are going to begrudge your work and resent your audience. Create to please one person, first and foremost yourself. And that's from Maria Popova.
I love
And I just love it so much because at the end of the day, you have to do what is for you. And that's the other piece of it. Like, yes, understand that you are going to have to try to have progress, but you're also going to have to make sure that you're doing it for you and tap into what your purpose is. And then the rest of it will come. If you operate with that standard of excellence and have those other two, the rest will come. And I think be open to what those opportunities are. One of my former colleagues, and she's now the editor in chief of Glamour, Sam Berry, someone just posted a quote from her yesterday where, she was urging people to, try different things. You don't have to just do what's in your job. You won't know until you try. I've realized that I love communications because I have, at my time at CNN, try to do, different things or volunteer on this committee through the affinity group that I'm a board member on, but I don't know what I'm going to love until I actually enforce it and try different things and realize, okay, yeah, this really is what my foundation is. So, just be open, be inquisitive, always have that pursuit of excellence, but don't be too hard on yourself either, and do it most importantly for you.
I love that. Benjamin Elijah Mays says, "Not failure, but low aim is sin," and I love that. Right, Benjamin Emays.
Hmm.
Shout out to Morehouse there. But I could get that tatted on me if I could. Probably should. Um, I want to talk more about who you admire within your career as you continue to grow. Who are you looking at? Who is inspiring your growth?
Yeah, one of our leaders, or actually, there's a lot of leaders at Warner Media that I really admire. So I'm just going to give a blanketed shout out. You all know who you are, because there are so many amazing people there, and executives at that, who have really just poured into me in ways that I'm so appreciative for. Another person that I would like absolutely love to meet, and hopefully at some point it happens, Bozoma St. John. I think she is just such a light, and I'm so inspired by her career, the things that she's done. And I also really love about her, and I feel like I'm the same way too. I love that she's a connector. She brings people together. I feel like she kind of embodies that saying where people say like, you don't lose light by like lighting someone else or helping someone like themselves or whatever that is. I feel like she's that person, just like a selfless kind of giver that's always connecting, and it's not transactional. And I think you can tell that by like her network. Like she is connected to so many amazing people, and time again it just seems like she's just been there to help. It's not been her trying to get anything out of it. But anyway, I also just think she is a fierce leader, and she's just done some amazing things with amazing brands, and I hope to do the same.
Love it. We feature Bazoma a lot at Bold Culture, and actually,
Oh,
she'll be
cool.
featured in our Black Paper Volume 2. So excited for her. And with that in mind, I want to talk about some of the tools that you're using to kind of increase your either for professional development on a day-to-day level. What tools are you using? When we mean tools, we're thinking about what you're reading, maybe what you use day to day, what you use to kind of maybe center yourself. What are some tools that you use?
Yeah. So I am a avid user of Instagram. But as you know, with any social platform, you can kind of curate your space and what you see. So I will say mine is pretty much an amalgamation of news, Beyonce, and then like really inspiring quotes and like scriptures because I am spiritual, right? So one thing that I've started doing, is I will like find affirmations, and then I will do voice recordings of myself saying them, and I'll play them back. So if I'm having like, a rough day, or I just know that I have a long day and I got to get through this week and there's a ton of deadlines or whatever that is, I play that back and it helps center me, a lot. And I really appreciate it. I think it's great. Another thing that I use is Audible. They have so many wonderful books on there. And that's really helped me a lot. And one of my favorite books that I've read, and I tell everyone about it because I really think it's an amazing one to just have in your arsenal, is Ego is the Enemy, by Ryan Holiday. And Lovey's new book I'm reading now. So I'm really excited for that one too.
Love, Lovey. Um, what aspects of your job do you like the most? I know you talked about really being able to manage up and do many things across channels, but what gets you excited to get go to Warner Media every day?
Yeah. I really love just the fact that I work in a media company. There's so much content, and even on the news side, it is so topical, right? Because the news changes day to day, but it also kind of keeps you on your toes. If there's a story bubbling up and developing, like, oh, that may be a great idea to foster a conversation around that. And maybe I've never done it before, but I can do my research, I can follow our reporting, and then I can cultivate something on that. I can get feedback from people. I love those kind of things where it's almost feels like a curveball, but it's just you adapting very quickly. I do well in those environments. So I really love that. And I like that at the center of it, again, is our brand and our content. And even within Warner Media, where the intersections are. If there's something that we're doing, like I was saying, that event I told you about earlier, we had someone who was a great voice like Van partnered with a great film that was coming out called Just Mercy. There's clearly a tie there because of the work that Van has done and, the way that he has contributed to conversations on CNN, all of those things, right? So it all just connected in a really nice way. And I think there's ways to find those synergies. And I like being able to find those. I also really love the relationship building part. Um, I really believe that you can never have enough relationships, but it's all about fostering them the right way. And so I love being able to do that with people across my company and throughout the industry.
I love that. Talking to some of our college followers here, we have a lot of organizations who have, entry level students, maybe just
Yeah.
graduates. Could you talk more about how you transitioned to CNN to Warner Media? What was that experience like? Did you find that it was challenging, particularly as a person of color, or just generally? Or, were there any organizations that you were connected to? What was that?
My experience transitioning into the workforce, really, and coming from an HBCU specifically, it was definitely, I wouldn't say it was challenging, but it definitely taught me a lot about myself. Obviously, and I think a lot of you will experience this very soon, or those who are recent graduates know this, right? That transition out of like fully managing your schedule, you think, to actually managing your schedule is very different. And I think for me, and especially starting at CNN at the end of 2015, going into an election year, although I don't have anything to do with the editorial side of it really, just because of my scope of my work, I was like ready to hit the pavement. Like I wanted to prove myself. And I was like really working myself to the bone unintentionally. Like no one asked me to do this. I was like early mornings, late nights, almost for no reason. And also just trying to get up to speed so I can show up well, show up well, show up well. And so I think there's a way to do that. And obviously, every industry is different. I can only speak on my experience. But I think just make sure that you're in tune with like what that balance is because it's really hard to find it when you're like a year into it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I also urge everyone to just continue to bring your full self into that space from day one. I think that's another way that like we move the needle because then I know that the next Black woman behind me or the next woman of color behind me or the next person of color behind me sees, oh, Amy's bringing her full self to work. She's wearing, her knotless braids. So I can do the same. And I think the ways in which we act can help others with that too. So I would just say, just completely be yourself as much as you can and be prepared and figure out that work life balance as you're entering versus when you're on like a year in and you're like, oh my gosh, what's happened here? I haven't seen my friends, I haven't talked to my family, and I'm tired all the time.
Love that. Thank you so much for that vulnerability, I should say. But that's what we want to talk about even outside of really creating more equitable environments. Really, what can we do to make sure that all people are ready for, the workforce, but particularly diverse individuals are, we're talking about our own journeys getting there, right? The journeys that we talked about in just, climbing the ladder, we should say, right? And what does that look like? I wanted to
Absolutely.
talk about, you know, you talked about your work being connected to creating diverse and equitable spaces on a day-to-day level. Could you talk about maybe some challenges that have been there in kind of creating that equitable work? Like, have you faced any challenges from, external sources, I would say, in doing the work that you do, basically?
Um, Fortunately, I have not. I think I've seen that other people have, but my driving force is always, and I also will acknowledge. I think my workplace is really great because it being mostly journalists, there is a pursuit of truth and integrity there to have the full story in a way that maybe some workplaces don't have that. So I am very fortunate in that regard. But I think in my day to day, again, it's sometimes just making sure that I am presenting what the business imperative is, especially if I feel strongly about it. And I think that one thing that we all need to do as people of color too is make sure that we are fighting not just for ourselves, but other people who are marginalized in doing that too. And I think that's one thing that I go back to as well. Another thing for me that I just like consciously try to do on the side through other things is like, I really feel strongly about internal development, right? But also what the recruiting pipeline looks like, especially for HBCUs. I think we all can relate to that here. It is so important. And so being able to foster that gap or be a brain trust for people is something that I really like to do, whether it's within news and sports or even outside of our brand. So I think it's all about just being open in your communication. And then still, sometimes you do have to just continue to offer yourself up as a resource so that when you do have a seat at the table, again, whether it's within those confines of your job, right, or elsewhere within your company, and I think everyone should feel emboldened to do that within their wider company, is to help move that needle forward wherever you can.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much, Aimee. I have three questions. They're a bit fun, I should say. I want to know, what music are you listening to right now? What are some of your favorite artists?
Um, okay, so Beyonce for sure.
Love.
Uh, Hmm. So here's the thing. I think this is an Aquarius thing, but I'm not 100% into astrology, right? But I'm one of those people who will listen to the same thing over and over and over again, like
Same.
over and over and over again. So I have been really bumping Drake as of late, like a lot. I think also because Take Care came out my freshman year. It's just super
Yeah,
nostalgic for me this year for some reason, but I've been playing that like a lot. So there's that. And then I also really like now. So I listen to Spotify and they have some wonderfully curated playlists, just like their UX experience is great. And so I have a radio based off of Complicated by now. And so that is just all the fields. It's like Solange, who I'm also very, very obsessed with, Gorgeous Smith. So just hits like that are my thing for sure.
I love it. I love it. All check, check, and check there for me. The second thing is, who are some of your favorite Black creators at this time?
Yeah, I think Zarina Akers is one of them. She is the stylist for Beyonce. She also has Black owned everything, which I encourage everyone to check out. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. So I'm really, really obsessed with her. I also think that there's like a bunch of illustrators I follow. I don't remember all of their names right now, but one of them is like So Lacy. Like I love her stuff. She's done a lot of great, really cool activations. So I follow, Morgan Harper Jones. I think she actually has a line in anthropology now, which is like really huge and like so amazing. So I really just like following illustrations and things like that. I also really love ceramics and pottery. So sometimes when I can, I go to the wheel and I just go all in on that. And I follow, or I've started to find now, because again, it's what you curate, a lot of Black ceramic and pottery artists who I just look at their videos all day. So unfortunately, I don't remember their names, but that's kind of the artistry that I'm into as far as creators.
I love it. I actually, I've gone to the ceramics where you have to paint the ceramics and then they blow it up for you. But I've done a pottery, but haven't done the whole experience. So
Oh,
maybe
it's so great.
yes, I have to
It's
go
so
into it.
great.
Before we ask our last question, I wanted to give some time to really give an open floor. Any, statements that you wanted to make, any other D&I questions, or even just general things around your career that you've experienced so far in these 5 years that you'd like to tell people or challenge people.
Yeah, I would just challenge everyone again to like figure out what your purpose is, find your standard of excellence and stick to it, and be open to any opportunity that presents itself. I have found in my career, a lot of things have just aligned because I have been open. If I hadn't taken opportunities or said, oh, yeah, I'll assist on this project, or, I'm going to join the board for this employee affinity group, I wouldn't have the connections that I have and I wouldn't have the opportunity that I've been able to have. A lot of the great things that I have done and that I mentioned before are things that were cultivated from relationships. And I think if there's one thing that you take away from this, it is build intentional, purposeful, and strong relationships that are not transactional, but ones where you can pour into them and they can pour into you. And I guarantee it will not only be such a wonderful support for how you function in the workplace, but it will inevitably affect and strengthen your work. It'll push you to be more creative, push you to be more innovative. And I also encourage everyone to um, make sure that you don't create a space at work that is an echo chamber. So, like last year, I had a career coach, which was such an amazing opportunity. Shout out to Yoko, my career coach. You are the best. And so I knew that I wanted someone who was a woman, right? Because as women, especially in the workplace, we deal with very different struggles, a lot of times than men. And so I wanted someone who could at least understand that on a base level, right? And then go from there. But I specifically wanted to make sure that I had someone who was a woman who maybe in this instance wasn't a Black woman. I wanted to have that outside perspective, right? I also wanted to find a career coach who wasn't in my industry because, again, I wanted that outside perspective. So, it was great to be able to find someone who was a good fit for me. But I think it's important to build spaces that make you comfortable where you can still feel seen and heard and you don't have to explain yourself, but it's also important to have other spaces that are a little less comfortable where you're constantly being challenged. I think that is really important. And I think the second that you don't feel challenged anymore, that's a note that you need to be looking for the next thing in order to grow. Or you need to be tuning in to see where can I make changes. And that's really important too.
I love that. One mini question. Was that coaching experience beneficial to you? And was that something championed by the company itself, or did you do it independently?
Yeah, the experience was completely beneficial. It was absolutely wonderful. It was like therapy, almost. I mean, obviously more targeted, but it felt like that too, which was nice. Yes, it was championed by my company. Some of my leaders recommended that I have it, and so it was a great opportunity. I was extremely grateful to be able to experience her, and now have that connection with her and someone I talk with regularly. And it really is. Such a wonderful thing. I encourage everyone to do it.
It's great to hear that it was championed by the company. It's something we tell our clients every day, every hour, right? You have to invest in, providing people mentors, coaches, sponsors, understanding the differences of that. If we're talking about creating equitable, inclusive spaces.
Yeah.
Our last question, Aimee, and thank you so much for your time. And it was great to hear about your journey. Definitely have to catch up offline and talk more about what you've been up to. But what does inclusion mean to you?
Yeah. I'm sure you have heard this, but I'm going to say it right. People often say that diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. I think that's true. I think it comes down to inclusion is action. It is what you do every day that brings people in to a space that they otherwise may not be in, and continues to bring them into that space, continues to keep them a part of that conversation, continues to keep them a part of that meeting, continues to, solicit their advice or their perspective. It is an action that has to be a permanent one and something that is consistent and long standing. And that again is how we move the needle. We have to be acting upon it, because it's not just enough to say it anymore. It's actually never been enough, right? But now is the time where if you want to be inclusive, that requires an action from you. And it's not passive, it's not a one time, it's not a reactive, it is an everyday conscious decision.
Well, everyone, Aimee has just dropped the mic here. Inclusion is action. I could not agree more. Aimee, again, thank you for your time. Let the audience know where they can find you.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I am primarily there. You can also find me on Instagram. I am at ASAN and then 3 Ds. So that's where I am. And I look forward to connecting with some of you all. and continue to be champions in your own spaces and feel empowered to do that.